Hi everyone. Today we're going to focus on Italian defense. So let's take a look at the position first. The position for Italian defense is E4, E5, and F3, and C6, and C4. Okay, so this position is known as the Italian game. Okay, before we start to look into each of the moves, let me tell you that there's two main variation under the Italian defense, which is the Hungarian defense and two knights defense. And other than that, we will look at how we can develop the pieces uh, under Italian defense. Okay, let's start. So first, let's say we move our bishop, black bishop to c5 square. Okay, and then further we will, for the white, we will use the c pawn to c3 square, and this is known as the classical variation of the Italian game. Okay, so let's continue the game. Let's look at what the black can move. So maybe we can choose the minor piece, the knight, to move to f6 square. And for the white, we can use the d pawn to move to d3 square. In this position, this is still the Italian game classical variation, but it is now as known as the Gicco pianissimo. So this is the another method you can use. Let's move furthermore. Now we use the d pawn to move to d6 square. Okay, that's how you can continue your game under this variation. Then we will use the knight to f6 square. So knight to f6 square. Okay, now this is known as the two knight defense. As you can see, for the black we have the two knights developed. So this is the two knights defense of Italian game. So to continue the game, we can use the d pawn to d3 square. So, and then we can use the black bishop to e7 square. Okay, now this one is known as the modern bishop, as the bishop is out there developed. So it is known as the two knights defense modern bishop. Okay, right. So let's say in this position, the white goes for castling. So the castling, and the black also go for the castling. So this is how you can continue the game under the two knight defense variation. Okay, then we will take a look at the bishop. Let's say this time we use the bishop to e7 square. Okay, in this position, this is known as the Italian game Hungarian defense. Okay, to further continue the game, we can use the d pawn to d4 square. And for the black, we can use the d pawn to d6 square. So now we can use the d pawn to capture the e pawn. So dx e5. And then we use the black d pawn to capture the white e pawn, so dx e5. So this is how you can continue the game under the Hungarian defense. Now as you can see, the queen is exposed, so in this case the white queen can go and capture the black queen. Okay, that's how you can continue the game, or you can go for the bishop to block the opening. So there's a various method you can use under this. Okay, now let's take a look at the next pieces. Okay, let's choose d pawn. So let's say the black d pawn is moved to d6 square, and then we use the c pawn to c3 square. Then for the black, we can use the g pawn to g6 square. And then we can use the d pawn, or we can go for a castling. We can use the d pawn, or we can go for the castling, or we can go for the h pawn to h3. So there are a few things that you can do over here. So let's say we move the d pawn to d4 square. In this case, for the black, it will develop is the queen to e7 square, and the white can go for the castling, and then we will go for the bishop to g7 square. So this is how you can develop the game if you move the pawn earlier to d6 under the Italian game. Now let's take a look at the g pawn. Let's say we use the g pawn to move to g6 square. Then we will move the d pawn, white d pawn to d4 square. So in this position, obviously the black will go after the white pawn. So ex d4, and then go the knight can capture the d4 pawn, or we can go for the c3 pawn to protect the pawn, or we can go for the bishop to g5 square. So let's say in this situation we use the knight to capture the pawn. So this is how you can develop the game under this position. Okay. So next we will move to h pawn. So let's say we use the h pawn to move to h6 square. Okay, this is known as the anti-fried lever defense. So this is the anti-fried lever defense position. So to continue the game, we can use the d pawn to move to d4 square. Then we can use the e pawn to capture the d4. So to continue the game, the white can go for the castling. And then the black can move with bishop to c5 square, then the c pawn to c3 square. Let's continue a little more. So let's say in this position the black choose to move to d3 square, and then the queen capture the pawn qx d3 square, and to develop the game the black moves the d pawn to d6 square. Now it's totally the black's game. So let's say in this position we use the e pawn to move to e5 square. So this is how we can further develop the game under this anti-fried liver defense. Okay, now let's take a look at the next pieces. Okay, let's say we use the f pawn right now. So we use the f pawn to move to f5 square. Okay, this is known as the Roseau gambit. Okay, so under this gambit, we can, for the white, we can use the d pawn to d3 square, and then the knight to f6 square. So then the white can go for the castling, and then the bishop to c5 square, then the knight to c3 square. So this is how we can develop the pieces under the Italian game Roseau gambit. So if we use the f5 pawn to move. So let's take a look at the next pieces. Let's say we use the a pawn. So the a pawn to a6 square. In this position, how we can develop the pieces is we can go for castling, as the minor pieces are out for the white, so we can go for castling. So then for the black, can develop the bishop first to e7 square. Okay, then for the white, we can go for the d4 square. Right, so this is how you can develop the game if you move the a pawn to a6 square. Now let's say we use the knight to d4 square. Okay, in this position, this is known as the Schling-Kostick gambit. Right, so this is another gambit. So in this position, the white knight will go after the black knight. So annex d4, and then the pawn ex d4. And in this position, we can either use the c pawn to move to c3 square, or we can go for a king safety castling. So let's say we use the c pawn. So c pawn to c3 square. So what would be the black move? Okay, the black will give the protection to the pawn. So we'll use the bishop to c5 square. And as you can see in here, so the white goes for the f7 pawn. Then in this position, the king capture in this position, we can go for king e7. So for the white, can go for the castling. So this is how we can develop the pieces under the Schilling caustic gambit. Okay, then next let's look at the bishop to d6 square. So bishop to d6 square. In this position, how to develop the game? We can go for castling. Then we can use the knight to s6 square. Further, we can use the white knight to c3 square. And then for the black, we can go for castling. Okay, so this is how we can develop the game if we use the bishop just now earlier to move to d6 square. Okay, now let's take a look at the h pawn. So let's say we use the h pawn to move to h5 square. And then we move the knight to c3 square. So to continue the game, we can use the black bishop to e7 square. Then for the white, we can use the d pawn to d4 square. So in this position, so the black pawn will capture the white pawn, so ex d4. And here the knight will go for the d4 square, so nx d4. So the black will continue to develop its knight to f6 square. And then the bishop can go for the f4 square. So this is how you can continue the game under this position if you move the h pawn earlier to h5 square. So this is what the overall overview of the Italian game. So let's just have a look. This is the Italian game defense. As you can see, e4, e5, and f3 and c6 and bc4. So this is for the Italian game. So in this position, as you can see, this would be the Italian game Hungarian defense. So the pawn and f3 and c6, bishop c4, and then the black bishop to e7 square. So this is the Hungarian defense position. And next, the overview would be for the two knights defense. So this is known as the two knights defense. As you can see, the two knights are developed. So the pawn e4, e5, and the bishop and the knight for the white, and two knights for the black. So this is known as the two knight defense. So that's all for today under the Italian game. So just to share that to all of you out there, that life is about using the whole box of crayons. So utilize all of the crayon colors and make your life colorful and beautiful. So see you all in the next lesson. Bye.